Hello, blueandgold.com fans. It's our honor to have Tim Sullivan on the show. Tim's from HokieHaven.com, Virginia Tech's home on the Rivals.com network. Tim, it's Saturday night. It's just around the corner now, 5 days away as we record this. This will actually air on Wednesday. Um, you know, the buildup is, I imagine, is pretty good. But I just want to get your thoughts with the night game, Notre Dame coming to town. What's the feeling around the Virginia Tech program?
Yeah, it's definitely that night game atmosphere is something that Lane Stadium hasn't seen in way too long after after such a weird year that we had last year. Haven't had that true night game yet this year either. So it's something that fans are really excited about. And obviously, when you play such a big national program like Notre Dame, even though it's not really an ACC game, so the stakes are maybe a little bit different than fans might be looking forward to. And some of those big time enter Sandman situations that they've had over the years is still something that fans are really chomping at the bit for. And it's something that I think the team is chomping at the bit for too, even though it doesn't have necessarily conference implications or any of those sorts of ideas kind of at play here. It's something that, you only have so many opportunities to play in Lane Stadium and certainly to play in Lane Stadium for one of the best night game atmospheres in the country.
Absolutely. I was actually there for the 2018 game as a fan, and it was a pretty unbelievable experience. I was able to go with a couple college buddies, so it was really neat. Notre Dame fans, and if let's talk about your quarterback because I think that you always want to know about the opposing quarterback, right? But Braxton Burmeister, I watched some Virginia Tech film last night, and I want your thoughts on him. But the one thing I think will certainly stick out is he can really scoot. I mean, he can run.
Yeah, he's a guy who, I mean, they had a kind of a true quarterback battle a year ago. Burmeister ended up winning it over Hendon Hooker, who was probably considered the far superior passer, ended up at Tennessee where he's now
Yeah.
starting. But he couldn't replicate what Burmeister can do on the ground. And I think there are very few quarterbacks around the country who have not only his pure speed, but which he does have a lot of, but also his ability to be kind of slippery in the hole and slippery behind the line of scrimmage is something that kind of wiggling out of tackles or avoiding contact is something that he does that not a lot of quarterbacks do as well as he does. And then of course he does have that speed. If he gets into the open field, he can eat up yardage with his legs. He is very willing to throw the ball after getting away from pressure. So his overall athleticism is definitely something that has been a huge asset for this Virginia Tech team. And it's a Virginia Tech team that probably needs him to move the ball on the ground a little bit to continue succeeding in the run game.
Yeah, tell me a little bit about, though. I know Virginia Tech's offense has struggled at times this year. I
Mhm.
mean, they had the 21-10 victory against Richmond last week. They had a punt return for a touchdown, that Tavion Robinson. They got off to a really slow start in their loss to West Virginia. Just what are the things that are kind of hampering them from being a more dynamic offense?
Yeah, I think a big part of it is consistency and not just consistency in terms of catching passes and completing passes and getting, the 3 yards in a cloud of dust sort of things, but it's executing that in such a way that you are able to move the ball down the field. Burmeister is very good at uncorking a deep ball. Obviously, that's kind of a low percentage play
Yeah.
most of the time. And then he's very good at moving the ball laterally along the line of scrimmage. But those passes that are 5, 8, 15 yards downfield, he has a little bit of trouble with executing those consistently. And that's something that if you can't do that, you better be able to run the ball very, very well. And he can run the ball very, very well. But the Hokies are having a little bit of trouble kind of in a more traditional run game so far this year. Khalil Herbert was a star last year, their first 1,000-yard rusher since the Frank Beamer days. So it's been
Yeah.
in quite a little while since a running back had eclipsed that mark. And they not only lost him, but they lost a couple starting offensive linemen. And it's been a process of figuring out not only who is going to carry the ball, but exactly where the holes are going to show up in the blocking schemes because some of these guys are inexperienced and working their way into a new system.
Bud Foster is no longer at Virginia Tech.
Mhm.
For those fans that don't know, last year was the first year under new defensive coordinator Justin Hamilton. I know it was a little bit of a struggle, but things have seemed to calm down. But tell us about that transition from someone who was a legend, obviously, in the Virginia Tech program.
Yeah, so Justin Hamilton played safety under Bud Foster back in the late '90s, early 2000s. So it's somebody who's kind of a chip off the old block, and I think the transition last year it went terribly. To be quite honest, the Hokies were outside of the top 100 in most defensive metrics, whether that's passing efficiency defense, whether that's run defense. It did not go well. There are obviously reasons that apply to every school around the country as to why a coaching transition might have been particularly difficult last year, but
Hmm.
Virginia Tech had I think especially hard time in the summers, especially during fall camp. They were without a ton of their starting players, a bunch of guys who they were expecting to rely upon. Obviously, I think most people know that first round draft pick Caleb Farley opted out of the season completely. Cornerback Jermaine Waller, who was supposed to be his other starting bookend, was out after
Yeah.
the third game and missed almost the entire year. But during fall camp, a ton of guys, including star linebacker Dax Hollifield, missed almost all of fall camp. Fortunately, he was able to return healthy by the time the season actually started. But these are guys who are getting used to new terminology, maybe new tweaks on the Bud Foster system. They didn't completely throw it away because, like I mentioned, Hamilton is a guy who played under Bud, who coached under Bud the past couple years before taking over as the coordinator. So it wasn't wholesale changes, but it was just the minor changes that you go through. And with a very young team that's dealing with guys who weren't expecting to play as true freshmen, and then a guy like Keontae Jenkins started almost the entire year at safety because of some of the depth issues that came up with COVID, with the overuse injuries from guys who didn't have COVID but had to play a lot more downs than they were expecting to. So some of those things went really poorly last year, and I wouldn't say it's a snap of the fingers, but certainly it looks a lot more this year like fans were expecting when Bud Foster kind of passes the reins to one of his proteges.
There's been a little bit of heat on Justin Fuente, but how important, maybe just from the fans, but talk about that and how important this game really is to the projection for Virginia Tech.
Yeah, like you mentioned, winning the Coastal Division is something that they haven't done since Fuente's first year in Blacksburg, actually, and that's priority number one this year. Once they've already lost a rivalry game to West Virginia, that old Big East rivalry got rekindled a
Yeah.
little bit this year. The way that your season kind of projects nationally has changed a little bit at that point, and I think it becomes much more about winning the division, getting to the conference championship game, and hopefully representing the ACC in one of the big New Year's Six bowls. But Notre Dame is also still a different story. It's a national program itself. It's someone that beating Notre Dame, even when the Irish aren't very good, beating Notre Dame carries quite a bit of cachet. And for a program like Virginia Tech that's kind of trying to find its way back to where it has been in the not so distant past, you need those sorts of games to not only kind of show that you can compete with the best, but you need to win some of those games to show that maybe you still have that same sort of cachet. You can still be the type of program, even if you're not quite there right now, you can still be the kind of program that plays regularly on a national stage, that regularly wins their non-conference slate, and that regularly will win the Coastal Division of the ACC because it's something that they haven't done enough recently. And Notre Dame is such an opportunity. It's a unique opportunity probably around the country, but certainly for ACC teams to have the opportunity to play Notre Dame kind of as regularly as they do and get a potential non-conference win that has the national brand that Notre Dame carries with it, and therefore the cachet that you get for beating a team like Notre Dame, or in this case of this Virginia Tech team, it may be a little too early to say, but playing them closely even if you don't win is something that I think this Virginia Tech team would hang their hat on a little bit going into the 8-game slog to end the regular season against all conference teams.
I'm not going to put you on the spot for a prediction or a score. It's early in the week, and everyone's still like, I mean, everyone's still trying to learn about the upcoming opponent because you spend a lot of time recapping the week before. But give me a couple things you feel if Virginia Tech were to beat Notre Dame, what did they do in that game that was key to the victory?
Yeah, I think there's an obvious one on offense and a fairly obvious one on defense. I'll start on defense because it's where I think the one that's probably more likely to be realistic, which is don't get beat at the line of scrimmage, kind of dominate at the line of scrimmage. The Hokies have some players who can stand up with, the 4 and 5 star recruits that they haven't gotten recently, but some of these guys that have developed. Defensive tackle Jordan Williams transferred from Clemson this offseason after graduating from a program that obviously has won multiple national titles in the not so distant past. Amare Barno, a senior defensive end, junior college transfer, a guy who's a really explosive pass rusher off the edge. And I think it even extends to the second level, at the linebacker level. Dax Hollifield is a guy who's going to get in there. He's just going to kind of throw his body at the line of scrimmage at times and kind of maybe be almost that fifth defensive lineman. If you can get guys like that to make an impact at the line of scrimmage and not get moved off the ball, I think that's really important. And then offensively, it does come down to Burmeister. It's always going to. He's a guy who needs to hit a couple deep balls. He has that capability, but like I mentioned before, it's obviously something that there's a little bit of variance that is kind of out of anyone's control, whether that's wind, whether that's the coverage, whether that's whatever it is, whether Trey Turner, the star wide receiver, can get up and make the grab. these are things that no matter how accurate Burmeister's ball is, it might not work out for the Hokies either way. But if he does manage to take the top off the defense once or twice, it makes life so much easier for the rest of the Hokies offense, because then you can kind of get more yardage on those wide receiver screens because the safeties are backed off. You back the safeties off in the run game as well. And the Hokies need to get that traditional run game going a little bit so that Burmeister isn't taking all the hits in the run game himself. And if you get that offensively, I think you see a different type of offense than you've seen for much of the year for the Hokies, because it has been a little bit of a slog. They have been having to grind out yards with Burmeister using his legs. So if you take that burden off of him a little bit by maybe shifting some of it to his arm and hoping that it works out for you, I think that's something that really helps the Hokies move the ball, even against a very talented Notre Dame defense. And I do think that on the other side of the ball, even if the Hokies aren't dominating up front, they have the opportunity to do well enough. You don't have that same sort of guarantee on offense, but they can do well enough on defense that they can complement it in an adequate offensive performance and turn it into a potential winning performance.
All right, Tim Sullivan from HokieHaven.com joining blueandgold.com on YouTube. I appreciate it, Bud. It's good seeing you, and hope you enjoy the game on Saturday.
Absolutely, you too.